How did the Legislative Assembly effectively become the National Convention? So what was the National Convention? The National Convention is our third type of government of the French Revolution. You would remember that our first was declared on the 17th of June 1789, when the Third Estate deputies banded together and declared that they were a National Assembly. 3 days later, they met in a tennis court. Obviously, they had been unable to get into the Hall of Mirrors to attend the Estates General. So they met in a tennis court, thereby declaring the tennis court oath, and they swore alongside some liberal nobles and some clergymen that they would not disband until a constitution was developed. So therefore our next form of government was the National Constituent Assembly, and its whole purpose and role was to develop this constitution which would govern France. But in order to do that, we needed ideals and we needed rights to live by. So therefore, Marquis de Lafayette proposed the Dormac, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, and this outlined the rights that men and women within France should wish to enjoy under this new constitution. The National Constituent Assembly released the 1791 Constitution. If you recall, this constitution stated that France would now be governed as a constitutional monarchy. That simply meant that the king was head of state still. He still had the right to hire and fire his ministers. He also had the right to a suspensive veto, which detailed that he could block any new law or policy that made its way into the assembly, and he could block that for effectively 4 years. However, as a constitutional monarchy, he also had to share power alongside the National Assembly. And the National Assembly were effectively those men who had banded together at the tennis court oath. After the National Constituent Assembly dissolved, we then had the Legislative Assembly. And obviously the Legislative Assembly only lasted for 1 year because we have the king who tries to flee to Austria, and therefore we can't have a constitutional monarchy because we have a ruler who is untrustworthy and who we can't govern alongside. So the Legislative Assembly is now dissolving to make way for the new government, which will be called the National Convention. So just like the Legislative Assembly, where did the National Convention meet? They are still meeting in the hall of Tuileries Palace. But what's more intriguing is who actually makes up the National Convention. You would remember with the Legislative Assembly, what happened there was Robespierre put forth a decree which declared that anyone who had sat in the National Constituent Assembly could not be a deputy in the Legislative Assembly. So we had a complete turnaround and turnover of the men that were elected. And in the Legislative Assembly, if you recall, there were 745 deputies, of which 330 of them were Jacobins. However, now with the National Convention, you can see that we're opening it up a bit more. So all Frenchmen over the age of 25 years of age and anyone who obviously has a job, so living by product of their labour, that just means that anyone who is employed can now be elected to the National Convention. So the National Convention is probably the first government that we have that has no distinctions of class. So any male who is over 25 years and who has a job can join this group. And because of that, you will notice a change in the numbers. We now, for this one, we're allowing 749 deputies. And notably, can you see the difference between this and the Legislative Assembly? We have 200 people who identify, or deputies, who identify as being Jacobin members. And we have 160 who identify as being Girondin. But more importantly, look at this large, massive group in the centre. We have 389 deputies who declare that they're undecided or independent. That means we now have a government where the Jacobins and the Girondins are going to work tirelessly to try and always sway this independent group to vote on their side. So, do we have a stable government? No, we still do not have a stable government. Okay, what's more importantly, and what we obviously have to look at with the National Convention, is we can see already how it's divided, all right? So when it comes to voting, you know that 200 people are going to vote this way and 160 are going to vote this way. However, these two groups need to sway a certain number of undecided to get their policies and laws through. So we have voting blocks, okay? That means people are either voting with this side or with this side. So when you walk into the National Convention in Tuileries Palace, there is a particular way that people are sitting in this room, this big chamber. On the left, you have people who are representing the Jacobins, okay? They're sitting to the left. So when you walk in, they are to the left. In their stalls and in their seats, we have the men of Robespierre, Marat, Danton, and if you remember, Desmoulins. Do you remember him back from the fall of Bastille? He was the one who jumped up and ripped the leaf from the Liberty Tree and declared that we should all storm and take up arms and storm Bastille. Okay, so we have these prominent leaders. We also have, remembering back to what we've just gone through, the Revolutionary Commune, there was originally 144 of those deputies who had been in the Legislative Assembly. Well, now in this new voting process, only 24 of them have found jobs in the National Convention. So we have 24 men who were originally part of that Revolutionary Commune. So we still have that extreme radical part or minority in the Jacobin Club. The whole point of this group is that they were prepared to accept and use the sans-culottes to support them. They wanted to rid France of counter-revolutionaries, and they really want to finally put the king on trial for treason. Now, one thing that I just want you to note, and that is the guys to the left, so the Jacobins, are also given a nickname, and that nickname is the Montagnards. That just means that they're the mountain men, okay? Because they're sitting up the left, they're sitting up on the high benches, they're looking down, so they're like a mountain because they're looking down, so that's why they're given that nickname. So if you ever see that in your readings, you just need to note that that is the Jacobin deputies in the National Convention. Okay, then to the right we have the Girondin deputies. Now if you remember the Girondins, they're from the rural province of Girondin, okay? Or Girondin, however you say it. But they're from the rural areas, okay? And they're a bit more hostile towards the sans-culottes. They don't particularly like how extreme and radical the sans-culottes are in delivering the ideas and messages of the Jacobin members of this National Convention. The Girondins, however, are pro-war. They want the king to be placed on trial. However, they did not agree that he should get the death penalty for his actions. You've got to remember that the Girondins are really largely supporting the people from the countryside. People from the countryside are feeling a bit left out in this revolution. They're finding that everything is too centralised in Paris, and Paris is becoming too militant and it's becoming violent, and it's only focusing on the needs and wants of the Paris situation. What about the starvation and suffering in the countryside? So the Girondins feel that the revolution is totally neglecting the needs of the people in the rural areas, so they're trying to support those people. So now we have a government whereby two groups are pitted against each other and they're trying to